Emily Turner pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. As the bus jolted to a stop at Yonge Street in downtown Toronto, the chill of early spring cut through her bones, but it wasn't the cold that made her hesitate. It was the thought of what waited for her inside Maplewood Bistro, the kind of upscale restaurant where the golden lights seemed to laugh at anyone who didn't belong. She stayed seated for a moment longer, clutching her phone like it might give her an excuse to back out. The screen glowed with the last message from Clara. "Please, Em, just go in." "I swear it's not as bad as it sounds." Emily wasn't convinced. Nothing about tonight felt right. Every instinct told her to head home, wrap herself in the quiet of her mother's small apartment, and forget she'd ever heard the name Maplewood Bistro. But then she thought of Vanessa's smirk earlier in the office, that sly arch of an eyebrow, that subtle laugh behind perfectly manicured nails. Emily knew this wasn't a normal blind date, it was a trap. 2 years ago, she might have cared about romance. 2 years ago, she had believed in late-night phone calls, in saving for a wedding dress, in the kind of love that whispered promises between grocery store aisles. But all that collapsed the day she found out her boyfriend of 3 years had drained her savings account, the money she had set aside for her mother's hospital bills, to fund a doomed startup. A month later, he vanished, not just from her life, but from the entire city, leaving her with nothing but overdue notices and a mother who asked why Emily looked so tired. Since then, Emily had stopped expecting kindness. Her world had narrowed to spreadsheets, pharmacy runs, and the humming of old machines in a hospital room. Love, she decided, was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. So when Vanessa, the queen bee of the office, whose voice could slice through silence like a shard of glass, announced that someone wanted to meet Emily, she knew it was poison wrapped in honey. "He's into quiet girls," Vanessa had said with fake sincerity. "A single dad, a little older, but harmless. Actually begged me for your number." Then came the giggles, the sideways glances, the cruel sparkle in their eyes. Emily declined instantly. She wasn't naive. She knew when she was being lined up for humiliation. But later that afternoon, Clara cornered her near the copy machine. Clara's face was pale, her eyes restless. "Look, they're making a game of it," she whispered. "They booked a table for you and this guy tonight at Maplewood. Vanessa's planning to be there with the others. I tried to stop it, Em, I swear. But she made it look like I was the one who arranged everything." Emily's throat had tightened at that. "So it's a joke?" she asked flatly. Clara stared at the floor, shame coating her voice. "I think so. But the guy, he might not know. Or maybe he does. I honestly don't know." Emily could have walked away then. Could have skipped the whole thing and let Vanessa laugh about how she chickened out. But something stirred in her chest, not courage, exactly, but pride mixed with anger. She was tired of being the girl people whispered about, the easy target, the quiet one. So she agreed. She told Clara she would go, even if every part of her wanted to stay home. Now, as she finally stepped off the bus, Emily pulled in a shaky breath and began the short walk toward Maplewood Bistro. The place glowed like a beacon, windows framed with strings of golden bulbs, polished stone steps leading to a glass door that whispered exclusivity. Clara followed her partway, stopping just outside, too ashamed to go in. "I'll wait here," she murmured, avoiding Emily's eyes. Emily nodded, touched by the attempt, but this was something she had to face alone, inside. The restaurant smelled of rosemary and butter. Soft jazz floated under the low hum of conversation. Emily felt immediately out of place among men in pressed suits and women draped in silk. The hostess looked her up and down before pasting on a polite smile. "Reservation for Turner?" Emily's voice nearly cracked. "Yes." The hostess gestured for her to follow. Emily's shoes clicked against the hardwood floor as she passed table after table of people who looked like they belonged in glossy magazines. Her stomach knotted tighter with every step, until the hostess stopped near a corner table by the window. And there, waiting, was a man already seated. But he wasn't alone. In a booster seat beside him sat a little girl, no more than 4 years old, with a cascade of brown curls and a stuffed bunny hugged tight against her chest. Emily froze. Behind her, just 2 tables away, she heard the hiss of laughter. Vanessa. Emily didn't have to look to know the group was there. Their phones angled just so, catching every detail. "Oh my God, One voice whispered, loud enough to sting. "He actually brought his kid." Another snickered. "Who brings a toddler to a blind date?" Emily's face burned. Her hands trembled. For a split second, she imagined herself turning around, walking straight back to the door, past Clara, back to the safety of her own quiet life. But then, as if sensing her panic, the little girl lifted her head. Her eyes were wide, innocent, and she smiled at Emily, a smile so pure it sliced through the humiliation. Like sunlight breaking a storm. The man stood when he saw her. He wasn't what she expected. His hair was a little tousled, his shirt plain but neat, his eyes deep-set, tired perhaps, but undeniably kind. Met hers with a quiet steadiness. He pulled out the chair across from him. "Hi," he said gently. "You must be Emily. I'm Daniel. And this," he gestured to the little girl, "is Sophie." Emily's heart pounded in her ears. Behind her, she could feel the burn of Vanessa's stare, the quiet mockery still buzzing in the air. Every part of her wanted to bolt, yet somehow, her body moved forward. She pulled out the chair and sat down. And with that one small act, the laughter at the other table faltered. The chair beneath her felt heavier than stone, as if the whole restaurant waited to see if she would break under the weight of humiliation. Emily smoothed the edge of her skirt with trembling fingers, trying to still the chaos inside her chest. Daniel's eyes, calm and steady, held hers. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, almost as though he understood that half the room expected her to flee. Emily forced a small nod. Yeah, it's fine." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Sophie leaned forward in her booster seat, clutching her bunny with one arm while the other gave Emily a tiny wave. "Hi," the little girl chirped, her voice clear and bright. It disarmed Emily more than Daniel's politeness had. Something about the way Sophie looked at her, like she was someone worth smiling at, pulled Emily's hand into a shaky return wave. "Hi there," from 2 tables away. The sound of a stifled laugh cut through the moment. Emily's jaw tightened. She could see Vanessa out of the corner of her eye, hiding her smirk behind a wine glass. Her phone angled just slightly as though checking messages. Emily knew better. Every second was being recorded. Every movement, every flicker of discomfort, was ammunition for gossip tomorrow. Daniel seemed to notice the glances too, but he didn't look rattled. He adjusted Sophie's sweater, fussing with the sleeves like fathers do when they want their children to be warm enough. His tenderness was unexpected. "I should probably explain," he said after a moment, his tone careful. "My babysitter canceled at the last minute. I almost called to cancel too, but..." His eyes softened. "I didn't want to miss the chance to meet you." Emily blinked. She had braced for excuses, maybe even arrogance, but what she saw was sincerity, and it startled her. "It's okay," she said quietly, though her stomach twisted with doubt. Was it really? Or was she just too stunned to argue? Sophie busied herself with the breadstick on the table, humming a little tune under her breath, unaware of the tension strangling the air between adults. Daniel chuckled softly. "She does that when she's happy," he explained. "Makes up songs about whatever she's eating." Emily found herself smiling despite everything. "She's adorable." "Thank you," Daniel said simply, without the smug pride she expected. His gaze lingered on Sophie with something gentler, deeper, like love shaped into patience. The waitress arrived with menus, her eyes flicking between them, and then toward Vanessa's table where the not-so-secret audience sat. Emily's face flushed. She buried herself in the menu, though she could hardly read a word. She could feel the whispers, could hear Vanessa's voice float across the room. "Can you believe she's actually staying? With him and the kid?" Emily clenched her fists under the table. Daniel, noticing the tension, leaned slightly forward. "I'm sorry about all this," he murmured, low enough so only she could hear. "I realize this probably isn't what you expected." Emily let out a humorless laugh. "That's one way to put it." He didn't take offense. Instead, he gave her a look that felt steadying, as though he were offering a safe place to rest her thoughts. It was disarming, almost dangerous, how easily he could cut through her walls. Sophie suddenly rummaged through her tiny backpack, pulling out a purple crayon and a small notepad. She looked up at Emily, then began drawing with a seriousness only children could have. Her tongue poked out slightly as she scribbled shapes across the paper. Daniel smiled, shaking his head affectionately. She loves to draw. Princesses, mostly. Sometimes dinosaurs. Occasionally both at once. Emily arched an eyebrow. A princess riding a triceratops? He chuckled. You joke, but that's her favorite. Rosie the Triceratops princess. The absurdity loosened something in Emily's chest, a bubble of laughter escaping before she could stop it. Sophie beamed at the sound, holding up her paper triumphantly. Look, she squeaked. Emily leaned forward, taking the page with both hands. Her heart stuttered. It was a crayon drawing of a blonde woman in a purple gown with a golden crown. Is this me? Sophie nodded solemnly. You look like a princess. The words struck deeper than Emily expected. She swallowed hard, unable to answer. Daniel smiled gently. She doesn't say that often. Usually everyone's a dinosaur. Emily laughed weakly, though her throat ached. Then I'm honored. She folded the drawing carefully, almost instinctively treating it like something precious. That was when footsteps approached their table. One of Vanessa's friends, feigning casualness, strolled over with a saccharine smile. Oh hey, she said loudly enough for Vanessa's whole group to hear. Didn't realize you were into this kind of thing, Emily. Her eyes flicked pointedly toward Sophie before landing back on Emily. I mean, you must know. You're the type of girl who ends up with single dads. It fits. Emily froze, her pulse spiking, before she could muster a reply. Daniel rose slowly to his feet. He placed a protective hand on Sophie's shoulder, his expression calm but his voice steady, unwavering. I'm proud to be a father, he said evenly, and I know how to respect the woman sitting across from me. Far more than anyone at that table seems to. The woman's smirk faltered, color rising in her cheeks as she scoffed and turned back toward Vanessa's group. Silence stretched in their wake. Daniel sat down again, meeting Emily's stunned gaze with a quiet apology in his eyes. I'm sorry about that, he said softly. Emily didn't answer. She simply looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside her shifted. This wasn't the setup Vanessa had planned anymore. Not to Daniel, not to Sophie, and maybe not to her either. For a long moment, Emily sat in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as though she could squeeze the heat of embarrassment from her skin. The laughter from Vanessa's table had dulled after Daniel's firm response, but she could still feel their eyes pricking the back of her neck like needles. She wanted to shrink into the shadows, to dissolve into the candlelit air of Maplewood Bistro. Yet Daniel's presence anchored her. He adjusted Sophie's napkin, fussing over the little girl's breadstick crumbs with the patience of a man, used to cleaning up messes without complaint. Then, as if nothing humiliating had just unfolded, he looked back at Emily. His smile wasn't forced. It wasn't smug, either. It was kind. I know this isn't easy, he said gently, but I'm glad you stayed. Emily swallowed. She should have scoffed. She should have stood and left, given Vanessa exactly the exit she expected. But instead, she stayed. The weight of his words was strangely grounding. You don't even know me, she said finally, her voice flat. Daniel leaned back slightly, not offended by the edge in her tone. Maybe not yet, but I'd like to. The simplicity of his answer startled her. In her world, people either wanted something from her or dismissed her entirely. But this man, this single father, spoke like he had nothing to prove. Sophie shifted in her seat, now drawing a series of squiggly dinosaurs across her paper. Daniel reached over to steady her crayon. Not on the table, Peanut. Okay, Daddy, Sophie chirped, immediately returning to her task. Emily found herself watching them more than she intended. There was no performance in his gestures, no calculated attempt to impress her. It was just a father, tired but gentle, caring for his child, and it pierced through her guarded exterior in ways she didn't understand. The waitress returned to take their order. Emily stammered through hers, cheeks warming under the woman's polite smile. As the waitress walked away, Daniel noticed the stiffness in Emily's shoulders. If you'd rather not stay, he said softly, I understand. I know this. Setup doesn't exactly scream comfort. Emily's laugh was humorless, but it cracked the tension. That's one way to put it. He tilted his head, studying her with eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. I don't want you to feel trapped, but if you're willing, I'd like to talk. Even if it's just for a meal. Her throat tightened. For years, She'd told herself love was a luxury she couldn't afford. That vulnerability was a risk she couldn't take. And yet here she was, sitting across from a man who spoke without guile, whose very presence seemed to dismantle the cynicism she'd built brick by brick. She forced herself to breathe, to steady the swirl of thoughts. "Fine, dinner," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. "But only dinner." Daniel nodded once, accepting her boundaries without protest. The clink of silverware and soft hum of conversations filled the space around them, a backdrop to the strange quiet forming at their table. Sophie, oblivious, held up another drawing with pride. This one featured a princess riding a dinosaur, exactly as Daniel had described. "It's you again," she told Emily solemnly. "But this time, you're braver." Emily's chest tightened unexpectedly. She blinked against the sting of emotion. Children had a way of seeing things adults missed, and Sophie's words landed with a weight Emily couldn't shrug off. Daniel noticed the shift in her expression, but he didn't press. Instead, he said, "She has a gift for spotting things others don't." Emily managed a small smile. Clearly, she set the drawing beside her plate, treating it like something fragile. Silence stretched again, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was almost companionable. For the first time all evening, Emily's shoulders began to lower, the tension bleeding out of her inch by inch. That was when Vanessa's laughter cut through the air again, sharper this time, like glass shattering on tile. "I mean, really," she said, her voice deliberately too loud. "Can you imagine lowering yourself to this? Dinner with a man who can't even find a babysitter?" Emily's hands curled into fists beneath the table. Her face burned. She could feel Daniel glance in their direction, but he didn't rise again. Instead, he leaned slightly toward Emily, his voice quiet enough for only her. "Don't give them the satisfaction," he murmured. "They thrive on reactions." She met his gaze, surprised at the calm strength behind his words. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't angry. He was simply steady, and for reasons she couldn't explain, that steadiness steadied her too. The rest of dinner unfolded slowly, a rhythm Emily hadn't expected. Daniel asked about her day, not in the perfunctory way people at work did, but with genuine interest. He listened to her answers, even when they were short, even when her voice faltered. He asked about books she liked, about whether she preferred sunrises or sunsets. Simple things, small things. "No one's asked me that in a long time," she admitted at one point, almost without realizing she'd spoken aloud. Daniel smiled faintly. Sometimes the little things tell you the most. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. As Sophie announced that her breadstick was now officially a magic wand, Emily found herself laughing. Not polite laughter, not forced, real laughter. And in that moment, something cracked inside her, a shift so subtle she almost missed it. Maybe this wasn't just a joke anymore. Maybe, against all odds, it was the beginning of something she didn't dare hope for. The plates arrived one by one, steaming dishes carried on polished trays, the aromas of roasted chicken, fresh herbs, and garlic butter filling the air. Emily stared at hers without much appetite, her fork hesitating above the food. She wasn't used to eating in places like Maplewood Bistro, where every detail from the folded napkins to the faint jazz humming from the speakers was meant to impress. Her dinners usually consisted of takeout containers or a reheated meal. Beside her mother's hospital bed, Daniel seemed to sense her discomfort. He cut Sophie's chicken into tiny squares, arranging them neatly on her plate before sliding the dish closer. "Careful, it's hot," he told his daughter, his tone soft but firm. Sophie nodded, humming again as if the food itself was a song she wanted to memorize. Emily found herself watching him. There was something about the way he moved, the ease with which he guided Sophie, that unsettled her, not because it was threatening, but because it was unfamiliar. She had forgotten what it looked like when someone cared so completely about another person. "You don't have to force yourself," Daniel said suddenly, his eyes flicking to her untouched plate. Emily blinked, caught off guard. "What? Your food," he said gently. "If you're not hungry, it's okay." Heat rose to her cheeks. "No, it's fine. I'm not used to this." She gestured vaguely around the restaurant, hoping he'd understand. Daniel gave a small nod, no judgment in his expression. "Neither am I, to be honest." I'd rather be at a diner with pancakes that come in stacks higher than Sophie's head. Sophie perked up. Pancakes, she exclaimed, nearly knocking over her juice. Daniel steadied the glass with one hand, chuckling. Emily laughed softly despite herself. The moment was light, simple, almost ordinary. And for a woman who had lived in shadows for so long, ordinary felt like a luxury dot as dinner went on. Daniel asked her questions that had nothing to do with work or appearances. He asked about the last book she had read, what kind of music she listened to, whether she liked to walk in the rain. It was strange how he made the conversation feel like a safe place instead of an interrogation. She found herself answering, hesitantly at first, then with more honesty than she expected. When the topic shifted to sunsets and sunrises, Emily admitted quietly, I prefer sunsets. They feel like a quiet goodbye after a long day. Daniel nodded, his eyes thoughtful. I get that. Goodbyes can be beautiful too. The weight in his tone made her pause. You say that like you've lived it. His fork hovered in midair for a moment before he set it down. He glanced at Sophie, who was too busy arranging her French fries into what she proudly announced was a crown. Then he looked back at Emily. My wife passed away 3 years ago, he said simply. Ovarian cancer. It was fast. Too fast, Emily's breath caught. I'm so sorry. Daniel nodded once, his expression calm, but the grief was there, quiet and deep, etched into the lines around his eyes. She was diagnosed late. By the time we knew, it was already beyond what treatments could fix. Sophie was only a baby, his voice softened. I promised her I'd do my best. Some days that's all I can manage, just doing my best. Emily's chest ached. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt inadequate. She reached for her water instead, letting the cool sip anchor her emotions. Sophie broke the heaviness with a triumphant cheer. Look, Princess Crown. She had stacked her fries into a wobbly circle on her plate. Daniel smiled, adjusting it gently so it wouldn't topple. Perfect, he said. A crown fit for a queen. Sophie giggled, then placed one fry carefully on Emily's plate. Now you have one too. Emily blinked, her throat tightening. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking in ways she hoped no one noticed. Dessert came almost as an afterthought, a shared bowl of vanilla ice cream with sprinkles. Sophie insisted they each take on a role. She was the ice cream princess. Emily became the royal knight of sprinkles. And Daniel, without hesitation, accepted the title of Sir Napkin, keeper of clean hands. The three of them laughed so freely that Emily caught herself wondering when she had last felt this light. Later, as they left the restaurant, the city's cool night air greeted them. Street lamps flickered against the sidewalks, and the sounds of traffic hummed in the distance. Daniel carried Sophie on his hip, her little head resting against his shoulder, her crown of fries long forgotten. Emily walked beside them, unsure of what to do with her hands, her heart. Her sudden sense of belonging at the corner near her apartment. Daniel stopped. Sophie stirred, blinking sleepily. Then, as if gathering all her strength, she reached toward Emily. Emily hesitated before taking the little girl into her arms. Sophie's voice was drowsy, soft against Emily's ear. You made Daddy smile a lot tonight, she whispered. He smiles more when you're here. Thank you. Emily's throat closed. She hugged Sophie tighter, blinking back tears she hadn't expected. When Daniel took his daughter back, Emily could only nod, unable to speak. They said goodnight awkwardly, Daniel's eyes searching hers as if there was more he wanted to say. But he didn't push. He simply smiled faintly, whispered thank you, and walked away with Sophie in his arms. Inside her apartment, Emily collapsed onto the couch, staring at the folded crayon drawings Sophie had given her. For the first time in years, she went to sleep smiling. The days that followed moved differently than Emily expected. She thought that night at Maplewood would be a one-time ordeal, something to endure, something she would never speak of again. But then her phone buzzed the next morning. Thank you for not walking away when you saw me with Sophie. The message was simple, almost shy. She stared at it for a long moment, her thumb hovering above the screen. She could have ignored it. She probably should have. Instead, she found herself typing back, thank you for making it less awful than it could have been. That reply opened the floodgates. One message turned into two, then into late-night exchanges about favorite songs. Silly pictures of Sophie wearing a tutu over her pajamas. Little jokes that made Emily smile at her phone in a way she hadn't in years. Slowly, carefully, something fragile began to grow between them weeks later. Daniel invited her to an event at a community center tucked between a library and a small garden on the east side of Toronto. Emily almost said no. Her instinct to avoid attention was still strong. But his message had been insistent. "Sophie has a surprise for you." When she arrived, children's laughter echoed through the halls. Paper butterflies dangled from the ceiling. Walls were covered with handprints in bright paint, and a small group of kids banged happily on plastic instruments near the entrance. Daniel greeted her in the lobby, Sophie perched proudly on his hip, wearing a pink tiara and tutu like she was royalty. "She's been talking about this all week," he said, his voice warm. Inside one of the rooms, drawings were taped to the walls. Sophie ran over to a crayon picture with bold, chunky letters scrawled across the top, "Mommy, too." The drawing showed 3 figures, Daniel, Sophie, and Emily in a soft yellow dress. Sophie beamed. "That's you," she announced. "You help Daddy smile." "That's what mommies do." Emily's knees nearly gave out. She crouched down, her throat tight, her voice barely steady. "Is that me?" Sophie nodded, serious in her innocence. "You're part of us." Behind them, Daniel shifted awkwardly, his expression unreadable. He looked away, fussing with Sophie's shoe strap as though the act could shield the storm in his eyes. Emily's heart pounded. She wanted to say something, anything, but words failed. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Children tugged on her hands to show her their crafts, and Daniel walked beside her, attentive but quiet. At one point, she whispered, "You're good with them. She's lucky to have you." He shrugged lightly. "I just do what I can." Something about his tone stirred a curiosity in her. His apartment, which she'd glimpsed in a photo once, looked modern, minimalist. His clothes, though simple, were finely made. He paid for meals without hesitation, yet never bragged. The waitstaff at the center greeted him with respect. Bordering on reverence didn't fit the image of just a single dad working a 9 to 5. As if he could read her thoughts, Daniel caught her glance. Their eyes locked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He gave a faint smile. "You saw it, didn't you?" Emily hesitated. Then, quietly, she nodded. He didn't flinch or dodge. "I try to keep that part of my life quiet," he said. "People treat you differently once they know you're a CEO." The word felt foreign in her ears. CEO. She almost laughed at the absurdity. She, Emily Turner, the woman who counted coupons and struggled to keep the electricity bill paid on time, sitting across from the founder of a major investment firm. "Technically," Daniel added calmly, "I started the firm. The center is one of the projects we fund. I don't like attention, so I keep it simple." But Sophie, his gaze softened at his daughter, who twirled in her tutu nearby. "She's the reason I do any of it." Emily's heart twisted. The more time she spent with Daniel and Sophie, the more she felt pulled into their orbit. But the closer she drifted, the more a knot of dread grew inside her. She didn't belong. Not in his world of influence, not in a life painted with quiet generosity and hidden wealth. She was just a junior accountant scraping by, a daughter who still owed hospital bills, a woman others treated as a punchline. And then came the inevitable blow. It was a Tuesday morning, dull and ordinary until she walked into her office. The moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned. Whispers followed her like shadows. Confused, Emily checked her phone. Her stomach dropped. Vanessa had posted a photo online. A candid shot of Emily crouched to tie Sophie's shoe at the community center. The caption read, "Some women will play house with anyone if it means free dinners." Emily's breath caught. Her hands shook as she shoved the phone into her bag, but it was too late. The damage was done. Laughter buzzed around her cubicle, sharp and cruel. Every time she lifted her head, she caught someone's smirk, someone's knowing glance. By lunch, she couldn't stand it anymore. She left without telling anyone, her chest tight, her eyes burning. That night, she sat in her apartment staring at the drawings Sophie had given her, now wrinkled from how tightly she held them. Tears blurred her vision. She typed a message to Daniel, fingers trembling. I think we should stop seeing each other." Then she deleted it, rewrote it, deleted it again. Finally, she threw the phone across the couch and buried her face in her hands. Claire arrived not long after, holding takeout and a look that was half pity, half frustration. "You quit your job?" she demanded when Emily admitted she hadn't gone back after lunch. "I couldn't stay there," Emily whispered. "And what about Daniel? Are you seriously running from the only good thing that's happened to you in years?" Emily sat up slowly, her voice cracking. "He's everything I'm not, Clara. Generous, powerful, stable. I'm just someone he feels sorry for. And Sophie, if I let her love me, I'll only hurt her too." Clara stared at her, exasperated. "He never once treated you like that. That's your fear talking, not him." Emily looked away, tears spilling freely now. Deep down, she knew Clara was right, but fear was louder than reason, and doubt was a cage she didn't know how to escape. Rain streaked down the window of Emily's apartment, tapping against the glass in restless patterns, as if echoing the storm inside her chest. She sat curled on the couch, Sophie's crayon drawings spread out on the coffee table before her. One page in particular caught her eye, the one with 3 figures holding hands. Under the chunky red words "Mommy," too. Her throat ached every time she looked at it. She had told herself she was protecting them by stepping back, but the silence since then felt more like punishment. A knock startled her. She froze, breath caught. No one ever came by unannounced. With hesitant steps, she opened the door. Daniel stood there, rain dripping from the shoulders of his jacket, Sophie cradled against his chest, her pink bunny dangling in one small hand. His eyes searched hers, calm yet piercing. "I didn't come to argue," he said quietly. "I just needed to see you. One last time, if that's all you'll let me have." Emily's lips parted, but no words came. The air between them felt heavy, charged. Sophie squirmed until Daniel set her down. She patted forward, her tiny shoes squeaking against the floor. In her hands, she held a folded piece of paper. She extended it to Emily with all the solemnity of a sacred offering. "This is for you," she said softly. Emily took it, hands trembling. She unfolded the page. Another drawing, this time of a house. A stick-figure family stood in front, Daniel, Sophie, and herself. Over the roof, written in Sophie's crooked letters, was one word: home. Emily's vision blurred. Tears slid hot down her cheeks. She wanted to tell Sophie she couldn't accept it, that it wasn't her place, but she couldn't speak. Not when the little girl looked up at her with such pure trust. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "We don't need perfect, Emily. We don't need more than what we already have. We just need you." His words were steady, but there was a rawness beneath them, a vulnerability he rarely let slip. Emily pressed the drawing to her chest, torn between longing and fear. Before she could respond, Sophie wrapped her small arms around Emily's legs and whispered, "Please don't go away." That night haunted her. Even after they left, the echo of Sophie's plea clung to her like a second heartbeat. She buried herself in work applications, in errands, in anything that distracted her, but the emptiness only deepened. Weeks passed. Clara refused to let her wallow. One afternoon, she thrust a ticket into Emily's hand. "You're going," she insisted. Emily frowned. "To what?" "The Hope Sparks Conference. Annual gathering. You need to hear stories of people who didn't give up. Maybe then you'll remember who you are." Emily wanted to resist, but Clara's determination left no room. So that Saturday, she found herself in a large hall in Vancouver, sitting near the back with a program she hadn't even opened. Panelists spoke of loss, addiction, survival, but Emily barely absorbed the words. Her mind kept drifting, and then the next speaker was announced. Daniel walked onto the stage, wearing a navy suit that fit him like it had been made just for him. He moved with calm confidence, but when his gaze swept the audience and landed on Emily, he faltered for just a heartbeat. Then he smiled, gentle, steady, real. "Good afternoon," he began. "I'll keep this brief because this conference isn't about me. It's about you, all of you women who keep moving forward even when the world tells you to stop." Emily's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear. His voice carried through the hall, steady but vulnerable. He spoke of starting Hope Sparks after losing his wife, of building something not out of wealth but out of grief transformed into purpose. He spoke of resilience, of ordinary courage, of small acts of kindness that changed everything. And then, in the middle of his speech, he paused. His eyes found Emily again, and this time he didn't look away. He stepped off the stage. Murmurs rippled through the room as he walked down the aisle, past rows of startled faces, until he stopped in front of her. Emily's breath caught. The world seemed to shrink to the two of them. In one smooth motion, Daniel dropped to one knee. Gasps filled the hall. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it not to reveal some massive diamond, but a simple gold band, elegant and understated. He looked up at her, eyes shining with something that made her chest ache. "Emily," he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "The day they made a joke out of my daughter, you sat down anyway. You saw past the whispers, past the setup. You made a little girl feel like a princess. You made me believe again. I don't need grand gestures. I just need you here, with us." Emily's tears fell freely now. She couldn't speak. Her hands shook, but she nodded once, then twice until her answer was undeniable. The hall erupted. Applause thundered. Cheers rang out. Strangers stood to their feet. Daniel rose and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he'd never let go. From the side aisle, a blur of pink tutu and bouncing curls barreled toward them. "Sophie!" Emily cried as the little girl leapt into her embrace. Sophie's laugh mixed with tears as she clung to Emily. "Does this mean?" Sophie asked breathlessly. "I have a mommy now?" Emily knelt down, pressing her forehead to Sophie's. Her voice cracked, but was clear. "Yes, sweetheart, you do." The crowd roared louder, but in that moment, Emily didn't hear them. All she heard was the sound of belonging, the sound of love finally finding her after years of silence. The weeks after the proposal felt like stepping into another world. One moment, Emily was the quiet woman who kept her head down at work, who lived between spreadsheets and hospital visits. The next, she was unpacking boxes in Daniel's townhouse, folding her life into drawers and closets she never imagined she'd share. It felt dizzying, unreal, but Daniel made space for her not just in his home, but in the rhythms of his life. He showed her where the mugs went in the kitchen, left sticky notes with reminders like "don't forget your umbrella," and asked for her opinion on simple things: which curtains fit best, which couch pillow Sophie liked. It wasn't the grand gestures that undid Emily, it was the small ones, the ones that whispered, "You belong here." Sophie, of course, wasted no time. To her, Emily wasn't a guest, wasn't a visitor passing through. She was mommy, full stop. She dragged Emily into her make-believe kingdoms, demanded bedtime stories, and slipped her tiny hand into Emily's without hesitation. One evening, after a long day, Sophie crawled into Emily's lap, her head heavy against Emily's chest. "You're warm," she murmured sleepily. "Like home." Emily's eyes stung as she kissed the top of the little girl's curls, realizing she had finally become what Sophie had drawn weeks ago. Still, the doubts lingered. When Emily lay awake at night, she sometimes stared at the ceiling and wondered how long it would take for Daniel to realize she wasn't enough. He was a CEO, a man who moved in circles of influence, who built centers that gave hope to entire communities. She was just her, ordinary, broken in places, patched together with quiet determination. But Daniel seemed to sense those storms before she spoke them aloud. One night, when she confessed her fear of not fitting into his world, he pulled her close and whispered, "I don't need someone who fits my world. I need someone who fits my heart. That's you." His words settled into her bones, chasing the darkness away. As summer unfurled across Toronto, Emily found herself stepping into something new too. With Daniel's support, she launched an art program at the same community center where Sophie's mommy, to drawing, once hung. The idea was simple: paint, draw, and dream a safe space for children who had seen too much, who needed to remember joy. At first, Emily doubted she could lead it, but the first time a shy little boy handed her a painting of a rocket ship and whispered, "This is me leaving sadness behind," she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Week by week, the program grew, the walls filled with drawings of dragons and castles, of families and hope. The children called her Miss Emily, but sometimes when Sophie was around, a few of them slipped and called her mommy too. Emily didn't correct them. Daniel watched from the sidelines, always present, but never overbearing. When Emily asked why he never took credit for funding the program, he shrugged. Because it's yours. You have the heart for it. I just signed the checks. But Emily knew better. Behind every canvas, behind every paint-stained smile, his quiet generosity stood. A year passed before she realized how far she had come. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Daniel suggested dinner at Maplewood Bistro. Emily hesitated at first, the memory of that night still sharp. But she agreed. The restaurant hadn't changed. The same golden lights glowed. The same polished floors gleamed. As they walked in, the hostess looked up from her stand and smiled in recognition. "You're back," she said warmly. "Same table." Daniel nodded. Sophie skipped ahead, her curls bouncing as she tugged Emily toward the corner table by the window, the very one where humiliation had almost driven her away. Emily sat down slowly, her eyes sweeping across the room. "Can't believe it's been a year," she murmured. Daniel reached across the table, threading his fingers through hers. His grip was steady, reassuring. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked before she could stop herself. "That night, that they set us up like that?" Daniel's eyes softened. He didn't hesitate. "No, because if they hadn't, I wouldn't have found you." Emily blinked against the sting of tears. "But it was cruel. They dragged Sophie into it." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes the best things in life come wrapped in the worst disguises. That night was ugly, yes, but it led me to the most beautiful thing I've ever known." Emily laughed quietly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "You really believe that?" He leaned closer, smiling with a warmth that still disarmed her after all this time. "I don't just believe it, I live it. Every day, with you." Sophie climbed into Emily's lap, interrupting with the urgency only children carry. "Mommy, Daddy, can we get ice cream after? The princess kind with sprinkles?" Emily hugged her tight, her heart overflowing. "Of course, sweetheart." Always, in that moment, surrounded by the soft hum of conversations and the glow of the same restaurant. Where it had all begun, Emily realized something profound. Healing hadn't come from grand gestures or sweeping rescues. It had come from steady kindness, from laughter around dinner tables, from little hands slipping into hers. It had come from love, quiet, unwavering, real. And for the first time in years, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.